Hello everyone, welcome back to MixbusTv. Welcome to another rapid fire Q&A. You guys liked these videos so much, but remember, I need your questions to keep it going, so go crazy in the comment down below. Before we start, check the info box down below for my mixing courses on ProMix Academy and special discounts and offers on plugins. And from now on, you will notice a join button down here. That means you can now become a MixbusTv member and get access to exclusive content like members-only chats, members-only live stream, post, news, and even mix consultation. So click the join button, take a look at what that is, and you will also support MixbusTv. Let's get to the question today. It comes from JH Studio. I was hoping you would go into detail on psychoacoustics and bass translation to small devices. I use several techniques for this, but I'm still looking for new ideas. Well, that's definitely an interesting question. And today we have so many different tools and so many different techniques and things that we can do thanks to the digital, the DAW, to make sure that our basses translate on small speakers. And I have several videos on it, but I want to say two things first about this concept. The first one is, no matter what we do, no matter how many tricks we throw at a bass, we cannot defeat physics. So a small speakers will never be able to reproduce low frequencies, the same ranges, 40, 50, 30, than a big speaker, okay? That's impossible. What we can do is to use several techniques, which most of them nowadays, thanks to YouTube and all the tutorials, are out there. So you will hear me repeat things that you will probably know, but I will throw something new in it. We use saturation, we use different octaves of bass, we use several things. And that brings me to the second thing I want to say, which is how we treat a bass to translate on small speakers. What processes we decide to use is genre dependent, because on a trap hip-hop bass, we will not use the same techniques, or even if some of them are in common, there are going to be slight variations than what we do when we want a rock bass, a real instrument, to translate on small speakers, okay? And I will start with the electronic one, because modern music, pop, hip-hop, trap, nowadays, with the massive presence of 808 and synth bass, we mostly deal with sine waves, okay? So a sine wave is basically a pure wave. It has no harmonics, lower or higher. So if we use a low enough sine wave, that will not translate on small speakers, okay? That's the problem, especially, like I said, on hip-hop, trap, modern pop, all that. A sine wave is hard for it to translate on small speakers if it's pure. So what techniques we use, and we'll see that on Pro Tools, we can use saturation, we can use a different octave blended in, and for this we use plugins like Subbass, which is my favorite for that. They have all these options built in the actual plugin. But then there are the psychoacoustic plugins, and those are a special kind of plugins. I absolutely love to use them. I use them a lot in my mixes, not just for bass, for guitars, for snares, for vocals. And then there are a couple of must-have that work on pretty much everything. One, my favorite, is Steel Waves Max Bass. So let's start with the sine wave, with a pure sine wave, and let's see what we can do. All right, for this example, I'm not for now using any third-party plugin that has everything built in, everything that you need to make the bass translate built in. I'm using Expand from Pro Tools. It's stock. And as you can see, I'm loading the mono sine. All right, I went to the basic and I loaded a mono sine wave. Okay, this is the purest form. Basically, is a wave that has no harmonics, just the fundamental. It has no higher harmonic, no lower harmonic. When we add the saturation, that's what we add. We add harmonics. So this sounds like this right now. Okay, you can see the energy is around 50. All right, 4750. This sine wave will be really hard to make it translate on a phone or a small speaker, laptop, without doing anything, because it's a pure wave. And this is what is usually used on, like I said, hip-hop, trap, and stuff. So let's take a look at the first plugin that I absolutely love, which is MaxBass. So MaxBass is a psychoacoustic processor. Now, there's a lot of confusion between MaxBass and low air or plugins like it. And I know Waves now has Submarine, but I didn't try it. So the differences between these two, let's first of all hear both. So I'm gonna stay in default settings, frequency 8, and I'm just turning up the MaxBass on this, on the same sine wave. This alone, not by itself, but it will be a first step, will make your sine wave or your very deep round bass, which are the kind of basses that have hard time translating on small speakers, already way more intelligible on small speakers. So before telling you what this one does, I will turn on low air, which is completely different. What are the differences between these two? MaxBass adds higher harmonics. You see the yellow part, the orange part? It takes the fundamental of the audio material that you're feeding in, so not just one sine wave, it could be a snare, a vocals, a real instrument, a real bass. This is why this one works for everything, for any kind of bass, and adds higher harmonics. Higher harmonics are what will make your bass, because they are higher in range, perceive the bass in small speakers. And our brain, once our brain perceives that there is a bassy element in the mix, it will recreate it. It will recreate the bass frequency. It sounds like it wouldn't be true, but it's exactly like that. That's how you do it. The small speakers, like I said before, will never be able to reproduce the actual low fundamental, but it will reproduce the higher harmonic, the higher octave. And our brain, due to a combination of things, the fact that we know how music works, our brain will reproduce, the brain will trick itself to recreate the low part of it. So let's take a look at the spectrum analyzer. You see this part here, 200, okay, 400, it's a lot more powerful. There's a lot more energy with this one. So this is not distortion. It just recreate almost another octave or two more octaves in there. While low air, it creates sub-synth harmonics. It generates new sub-harmonics. So it goes even lower than that. You use lo-fi when you have a higher octave. So for example, if I turn this one 2 octaves higher, well, let's do 1. On that one is where you want low air, because without, it sounds like this. Okay, so it generates the subharmonic. MaxBass generates the higher harmonic. Okay, so you can also solo the MaxBass part. You hear also how it makes it more punchy. And the original bass, you can solo that. How the MaxBass does it, adding a little bit of saturation and a collection of harmonics to the material. Why I like it so much? Because it's never saturation. It never sounds like distortion, even if it's pleasant, even if it's not too obvious, even if it's not really distortion, it sounds very clean. So that's why I really like Max Bass for this one. So this will work on any kind of bass. When you want it to translate on small speakers, that should be the first step, because sometimes that's just what you need, the only thing you need. The good thing about this one is that you can lower the original bass if it takes too much headroom. Okay, there's also a little bit of growl that, you know, that helps. That's the subtle saturation. There's also a little bit of saturation on low air, and especially in the low part, the low air part, more than the low. Hear that note, the slightly higher note, that's a little growl. But yeah, these two are completely different. So when you want your bass to translate to small speakers, don't go for low air, go for max bass. Okay, so that would be the first one. The second one, as we said, it would be saturation, any kind of saturation. Which one? It will depend on the material every time. It could be a guitar amp for a rock bass, but anything. So right now I'm gonna try really quick a couple ozone exciter on this. Now the problem with pure sine waves is they will not take distortion that well. Okay, this is the problem with pure sine waves, which sometimes we use, most likely now we also have some other waves in it and some other harmonics, but that's the problem with sine waves. Using distortion and saturation on them, it always sound a little bit like too distorted and too digital. We do use that if it's tucked in enough. So the other thing that we can do is, just when we have a mono sine like this, is to just add another kind of wave to it. And it does change the sound a little bit, but again, it's all a matter of volume and level in the mix. You can make it so it will not be noticeable in the mix. The other trick, which is the most simple for a sine wave and really deep bass, is just add an octave higher and tuck it in. Without. Of course, the higher the volume of the higher octave, the less deep the bass will sound, even if you're not taking away anything from the sine wave. But if you combine this with this, then you're already at a good point. okay? Because max bass now also picks up the second octave and creates even higher harmonics for that one. So that will definitely help you out in translating your basses on small speakers. If we have a plugin like, for example, Subbase, like I mentioned before, Sublab actually it's called, this would be the sound. Okay, so in a plugin like this, you have everything on it already. It has more pure synth. And there's only some sort of saw or different waves, and you can add distortion if you want and compression. So a plugin like this basically has everything built in, but let me try to find a rock bass and see what we can do with that. Now this is a very well recorded bass. You will not have any problem making this bass translate, but just for sake of example, for this one, well, first of all, I would add probably a amp sim for this, first of all, because it kind of sound direct. So I'll probably go for an Ampeg collection here. The low end is already better. Okay, but let's say this bass was something like this. Okay, this would have problems translating. So there are several things you can do. If I can find a saturator, for example, that has a mix knob. That will help a little bit. Another thing that you can do is, again, going with max bass. We already established that this one will work on anything. There's another plugin that you can use for that, is Vitamin. Now I exaggerated the cut a lot, so it's like I cut a 300. If you give it a little more hair. Okay, this will generate this higher harmonic, recreate it, it will enhance it, and the articulation is going to be easier to pick up from small speakers. And again, even if it's a small speaker, it doesn't reproduce the low end. Hearing the articulation of the bass, our brain will perceive that there is a low end element in it due to the arrangement. We know how music is, usually made, and we recognize that's a bass instrument. Our brain will recreate the low end. One trick that we use in mixing is when you have, let's say, a big fat snare or a big fat kick or even a big bass, is to let, at the beginning of the song or at the beginning of every chorus, for example, let the first note or the first hit full bandwidth, so all the low end. So our brain perceives, wow, this snare is so big, this kick is so big, this bass is so powerful. And then take it out for the rest of the chorus. I can assure you, your brain will still feel and think, and your ear will still hear that there's a very powerful kick and bass, especially if you, at the end, you put another one. So this is psychoacoustic. It's not just the plugins you use, it's the trick that you use in mix. Make the one element that you want to sound massive, make it sound massive for 1 second, and catch the listener attention for one hit, one note, one passage, and the brain will now know that that song, oh my God, you heard that bass. Even if the rest of the song you took like 50% of the low end away, the brain will not perceive that, especially if it's a good mix and it's well balanced, you know. And you have to take out the low end because you have all the other elements filling in the headroom and the space. So that's another trick you could, that's actually the most important trick, is that's why automation is so important. Just make elements pop up here and there so the brain perceive them and say, oh, there's a bass like there, holy, it's so big, you know. And you don't need to keep it that big for the whole song, maybe another couple of times, but sometimes even once, especially with snares. That's a neat trick. You just do one big power shot, and then the rest, you know, you take that big sample away and you leave all the others. Your brain will still perceive that snare as big. So yeah, this wanted to be a rapid fire, so I will not keep it longer than this. But you let me know if you have any question on this one. I can expand as long as you want on this one and do more examples and do more tricks, but leave your questions in the comment down below. And before you go, check out the join button if you want to become a member and access to exclusive content. I hope this video was useful. I hope you liked it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like. Follow MixbusTv on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.